technical work, technical working group for the Broward Regional Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. So we appreciate your being here. We have a full agenda. And so Christine will lead us through that. So let me just hand it off to you and get started.
Good afternoon. Excited to be back together again. It's May already. Oh my goodness. Really excited today because we're going to jump into some focus plans. So as you remember, we have all these tasks to achieve. Task 3 is action planning, which includes the big plan plus 10 focus plans. In our big deliverables checklist, we highlighted the 3 we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about neighborhoods, railroad, and school zones. And I've got 3 separate champions here today to lead you in those discussions and really give you a great overview. But we really want to focus in on those separate topics to understand how we can achieve zero within school zones, within rail, and within neighborhoods, right? So really thinking differently about the different contexts and the different needs within those focus plans. So without further ado, because we have a lot to do today, I'm going to introduce Thomas Rodriguez to talk about rail.
Cool. Hey, good afternoon. Thomas Rodriguez, WSP. Got a lot of slides, but I do intend to go through them quickly. So if there's anything that you're like, wait, go back, we can either do that, or there are also a couple pauses in there for some feedback and reactions as well. So just quickly, where are we with the safety action plan? Brief agenda. I'll spare you reading through all the bullet points, but basically just data and the crashes, the countermeasures, and the hotspots are kind of the headliners here. Some of those headliners that I want to keep in mind in terms of just kind of what the statistics are saying is that there were 74 injuries and 63 fatalities over the study period that we're looking at for this safety action plan overall. So let's just dive straight into these patterns. We're going to go north to south along the corridor. You'll see both the Tri-Rail corridor on the left, of course, FEC on the right. Without boring you with all the particulars of why, there's 2 different data sets from the FRA that we look at. There are trespass incidents, which is one report set, and then there are crossing incidents, right? Those are the ones that we typically see, unfortunately, with video footage of vehicles on the right-of-way and so forth. The trespasses tend to be a little bit less visible, people crossing where they shouldn't be, generally on foot, but not always. So just, I'm going to kind of go through these relatively quickly. You're going to see the trespasses are these red, yellow, orange kind of color configuration. And then the crossing incidents are in this kind of blue, but suffice to say, these are hotspots where we're identifying patterns of incidents. Within each of these, we're kind of generally blocking off areas that we're anticipating that we're going to do a deeper dive into some of these treatments for these particular segments of the corridors. So again, that was the northern portion of the county. This is from about Pompano Beach Air Park down to the South Fork of the Middle River. And again, this is trespasses. These are the crossings, same segment of the corridor. Okay, there we go. Right in the heart of the county now, just near Broward Boulevard and so forth, right? Down into the airport segment, again, trespasses. And these are at the crossings. And then this is the southern portion of the county. These are, again, trespasses and the crossings. The X's are actually railroad crossings. Official, yeah. The X's are just the crossings, period. And the hotspots themselves are the color palette that you see on there, the blue to the kind of light blue. This is like the polar look, right? So what are we doing with this? Well, before we dive into a particular hotspot and an exercise, I want to introduce some of the countermeasures to the area. But I guess just, if there's any reactions to that, we want to give folks an opportunity. I know those are a bunch of slides all at once. Went north-south really quickly there. You can jump back if there's any kind of comments or reactions, or we can keep on going. So knowing that we have this issue of these corridors, what are some of the things that we can do? We're going to start with some of the more obvious ones that we're generally all familiar with, just from driving around and walking around in Broward and throughout South Florida, and getting into some things that might be relatively innovative, might be new for our community. Signage and markings, pretty run-of-the-mill. Different styles of those. Signals, gates, of course. You get some fancy ones that glow in the dark, like lightsabers if you're a Star Wars fan. Medians and delineators. It's kind of hard to see this one, I know, but I wanted to use a local example. So this is, of course, Broward Boulevard, right at the just forgive me, the Brightline station. Those medians, and those have been are of course being implemented right now as we speak by the Broward MPO through that the crossing elimination funding. Those are going to additional ones are going to be installed throughout. Keeps people from jumping around and cutting in, of course, into the opposite flow of traffic. The dynamic envelopes, right? We got a few of these here in Broward County, but doing those kind of really makes these higher visibility opportunities limit people from stopping where they shouldn't be stopping. This is, I want to say it's commercial. Yeah, I think up on, the Tri-Rail corridor here. And this one, they actually went through the trouble of also painting, the rail path as well. So you got the diamonds on either side as well as the color markings. And can go with the kind of that tan color, reddish tan. Advanced warning systems get people to stop in advance before they get too close, and then all of a sudden you can't get to, across the crossing without piling up traffic and so forth. All right, I know this is kind of an ugly image, but people are their own worst enemies sometimes, and how do we keep them from crossing where they should? Well, you got fencing, channelization treatments, physical barriers, basically just make it harder for people to walk and cross where they shouldn't be, or drive for that matter. This one's a bit prettier, but also still just fencing up in New Jersey. And then ideally you can break that down with some landscaping or use a combination of those two treatments, right? Kind of just make it harder for people to get through in places where they shouldn't be onto the railroad right of way. This is one of my favorites. I call it the human cattle gate. If you're familiar with kind of farms, right? You get those bars that go across where you don't want your livestock to go, and that you don't need to close the gate. Well, this is to me like the human version of that. I also call them a very official term, spiky thingies. Basically, the way they work is they're made of rubber. They're relatively low cost, but you put them at places where invariably you're going to have openings onto the railroad right of way. So essentially, it's just a pedestrian crossing or a road crossing. It's hard to get across here if you have these in the way. They're not going to hurt you necessarily, but they're extremely unpleasant to walk on. So they discourage people from doing that. You make them obviously long enough that you don't have like the Olympic long jumpers kind of trying to see how far they can go. This is a different style of that. And as I mentioned, you use those in conjunction with other treatments. On their own, they're not going to work very well, or else people will just walk around. Surveillance and detection, right? This can be by camera remotely, or just kind of having folks in presence on the right of way along the corridors. Lighting. It's been a bit of a challenge to find lighting images on the railroad corridors, but this is highlighting maybe the deficit of lighting, right? You see a railroad corridor here. You see the lighting on the highway, and that's all well and good. But if you got lighting on the corridor of the train tracks themselves, a couple things, right? It improves the visibility if somebody is trespassing there. It also discourages that trespassing if people feel like they're going to be seen and more visible as they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. Train alerts, loud horns. I know we've got quiet zones, so these are kind of a bit in opposition to that, but when you need them, you need them. Hope poles, suicides unfortunately are a reality, and if you can intervene and get people resources to avoid a crisis. Okay, this is kind of the absence of a treatment, but I do want to go through this really quickly. Delineating where people can legally and safely cross the road. So this is Dania Beach Boulevard, I believe. You'll notice that's the train tracks right there, the white lines. I kind of highlighted it a little bit. I want you to pay attention to the sidewalks though. Helpfully highlighted them on this slide. And conveniently, they don't take you across the train tracks, right? So how do we get people across that safely? Right now, you either have to kind of walk into the street on the shoulder of the road where you might not feel terribly comfortable, or as we know, people will probably stay perhaps off the roadway to avoid vehicular traffic and maybe take a risk by being closer to the train tracks. So equipped with these tools, I wanted to walk through an exercise here for one particular spot.
If you don't mind, this is James Cromer. We do have some people that called in or participating virtually. And I think we should have a couple from SFRTA. Is that correct, Fossil?
Yes. So currently online we have Selena Saman, Desiree Curry, Josette Severin, Marcus Thomas, Natalie Gesbeck, Rachel Solomon, and Sasha Lovello.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that Natalie and Marcus, you're aware that we know you're here. So if you want to say something, give the signal to Fossil and we'll get your comments.
So I want to talk through a little bit of the exercise we're going to be doing as part of this action plan, delineating these hot spots. You saw the corridors. We went through them fairly quickly, but we're going to drill in on this segment here in Hollywood. This one kind of lit up as a fairly heavy concentration of, again, these are trespass incidents. Sorry, not calling one out here, Rick. But yeah. But again, we're trying to look at these holistically, right? We can sort of treat every incident, fatality, or injury as an isolated incident, or we can sort of say what's going on systemically here along this segment of this particular railroad corridor. Again, this just to kind of refresh folks' memories. This is the crossings, and this is the trespass incidents. And we're going to do a slightly deeper dive on this one particular intersection, Garfield's. It does seem to be almost the brightest kind of hotspot of them all, if you will. And talk through an exercise. Before we dive into it, we're looking sort of northwest right here. So hopefully this is visible well enough, but I'm happy to open it to the floor if anyone sees anything here that stands out to them about this particular railroad crossing at this particular site. It's going to be closed. Okay. Stealing my thunder here. No, that's good to hear. I mean, I guess that's, response to the data. I think it's still going to be useful to go through this exercise because, Garfield is problematic, but it's also the rest of the corridor. So the things that we're going to talk about here are not exclusively applicable to this particular site. Anything else besides it's going to be closed? All right. Well, don't be shy. But view 1 and view 2, we're going to look at 2 street view segments of this corridor here. Looking roughly northwest along 21st Avenue. Couple of things here. Anything stand out to folks at this particular location?
I don't know too much.
What was that?
I said I know too much. Well, not about anything else but this crossing. It's one of the only crossings, grade crossings you'll find that doesn't have traffic signal control. And that's kind of what started the closure initiative, which is well underway right now.
Right. Okay. A couple of things that we've noticed as we've gone through this exercise, right? A couple of things. One, commercial retail, right? Kind of gives somebody a destination on the opposite side of the tracks that they might want to go to. There is lighting here, but it's lighting up the street. It's not lighting up the railroad corridor. Just wanted to call that out. Oh, sorry. And then the last thing here on this particular view is there's this clear area. There's no redirection. It looks almost like a nice place to put out a picnic blanket and have a little break. It's not too sunny. It seems like a welcoming environment that you don't feel dangerous kind of walking up to and across. So the same exercise now looking directly west from Garfield Street. And the things that kind of stood out to us here were as follows, right? You got no slider-walk connections at the railroad crossing. So the slider-walks will channel you to the north or the south, but there's no obvious safe path across here. No official markings to get you over there. You got this misaligned street grid, right? The sidewalk is aligned with an opportunity to trespass at this location. It doesn't really put you in a natural spot to cross legally. And there's no fencing here to discourage any sort of trespassing, right? So combine all these things and it kind of puts you in this recipe for an opportunity for people to just want to cross in a place that's illegal. I spoke with Rick a bit before, and he kind of pointed out a couple other things that I wanted to show here. It might be hard to see on the screen, but there's a traffic control box kind of smack dab in the middle of the image here. So, your visibility from a pedestrian perspective or a vehicular perspective is also limited in these particular spots, in addition to the lack of signalization or rail crossing, right? So applying what we saw on that, on the countermeasures, want to kind of talk through a potential quick build site here. And I recognize some of these things are quicker than others, but nevertheless, we feel they are generally achievable in a fairly quick time frame. So strategic fencing, trespass guard panels, landscaping, the dynamic envelopes, and crosswalks were some of the things that we brainstormed. Just reflash those images really quickly here, kind of refresh memories on what those could look like. And then what does that look like? Well, we put up some fencing along the corridor to limit people's opportunities to cross where they shouldn't be crossing. You put those spiky thingies, technical term, this particular location, keeping people from being able to get into the right of way itself. The landscaping, break up that visual kind of fence that might not be the most attractive thing, right? You don't want pushback, but also maybe it's a combination of those two things. And then finally lighting. If somebody's in the right of way of the corridor, make it harder for them to be hiding within that envelope. Make them more visible if they are there and they shouldn't be. And then finally, that dynamic envelope of crosswalks and markings, so if we're not going to close this crossing, and it sounds like we are, but if we don't, well, give people safe passage and opportunity to cross in a way that's going to make it easier for them to get across. So that's kind of the nutshell. Not sure if there's any reactions there. We are, going to be digging this deeper dive at the other hotspots that we identified throughout there. I didn't go into every single one of the hotspots, but you did see where those clusters are. So those patterns that we're seeing emerging through the data are the areas that are really going to get our deeper dive on those analyses and seeing how we can put those implementations into effect.
Because you did so great on time. I just wanted to take a second and just say, like, out of the countermeasures, which ones do you think are more effective, less effective? Like, which ones are we seeing in our cities that are working so that we can make sure that we're prioritizing those?
Yeah.
Eric?
The one I didn't see. The one that needs to be a big red light that says do not turn right when the train is coming, which they put in Pompano and a few other places that need to be at every single intersection along the FEC railway. And they need to be there. So that's the most effective one, is you cannot turn right when the train is coming. I have a few comments, but if you want to ask that question first, we can do that.
Any other thoughts on countermeasures?
Can you go back us?
In general, I think I just want to have a general discussion.
Yeah.
Not real.
So just a couple of things. One has to do with the dynamic envelope. So, and I don't know what the current status of this is, but DOT put the first test one out, I think on Commercial Boulevard. The idea was to actually paint yellow, not white. And I think FRA or FHWA wouldn't allow this. And so, to me, it would be a lot more effective if we could use a different color. And in fact, you had an example of one that was a different color. Has that policy, did that position change?
You heard about that?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's something we can look
Yeah.
into and get back to you on.
The other thing, which is a maybe more, this has to do with vehicles on the tracks. It may be more draconian measure, but I believe, and maybe Rick remembers years and years ago down at Helmut Boulevard, the CSX crossing, we had issues with vehicles backing up, eastbound, backing up from I-95 onto the tracks. What we did was we put a separate set of signal displays eastbound, facing eastbound traffic west of the tracks, created a separate signal phase, which is adding an efficiency. You clear out the middle, people are stopped, and the middle is cleared out. There's never a track unless they're purposely going around the gates. So this is a way that I think we could address that type of thing maybe a bit more effectively than with the dynamic envelope. But I see just driving around a lot of drivers, I don't even understand it. Some of the crossings, the crowns are big enough that you can't really see the dynamic envelope anyway, until you're pretty close to it.
Can I ask a follow-up? How
Sure.
would you decide which crossings have the queuing issues? Do we have data that shows that? Does like have that data?
I think that we looked at some of this back when I was still with DOT using the TNC, and they've got cameras at most of the interchanges, 95 interchanges, and they could probably reposition these to observe traffic conditions at the CSX crossing. So that's there. I can't say about the FEC.
This is James, if I could add, if you go to the next slide. One more. Well, and I'm glad Mark brought this up, this idea that there are improvements that can go along the rail corridor. And so there are efforts to do some of those things there, but there's also stuff beyond the rail corridor. So these crosswalks and different things of that sort. But Mark also with mentioning the traffic signals, I wanted to make sure we talked about that up. Also what Eric said about the no turn on red or what, when the train's coming. So this is a question of our rail partners that do own their corridors. And so certain improvements do require working together. But I think we also need to look at what we can do outside of those corridors. And Mark, I'm trying to remember if we had this conversation about some of the traffic signals even further out, and maybe Jonathan too. So not just the Helendale Beach example, but maybe signals that may be leading in there and further away to encourage the free flow or the movement of cars through the crossing area.
Distance up and downstream from a crossing, considered preemption operation.
Okay.
used to be the ones signaled right at the crossing. I think there's probably instances where the next signal to maybe even the next, if the traffic is bad enough, you want to figure something out, be able to clear out the area and really move traffic on the cross street. That's a whole separate.
But I want that to be part of the mix of something we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, looking at the preemption operation, certainly, all of the signals that interchange or at the grade crossing should have a preemption operation plan program. Maybe some of those could be revisited, maybe they could be expanded to include other signals.
I'm trying to think, when I lived near the tracks there at, along Dixie Highway, that section north of Fort Lauderdale. And I'm thinking where some of the signals are, some on the west side tend to be right near the crossing, but some on the east side are pretty far back. And so that opportunity to look if that's making a difference can be helpful. Eric, I know you're going to talk about some other things too, but I do want to make or encourage you if you weren't going to talk about trespassers, I wanted to see if that's something you're going to hit. Okay.
So most of the information that I noticed, it's mostly geared towards pedestrian bicycle crossings. Is there any reason why we have left out vehicle train crashes and any kind of solutions for those?
We didn't leave them out. The crossing incidents do generally cover vehicular. Those aren't exclusive to pedestrian or vehicular. The trespasses typically are pedestrian. I'll say that. The crossing incidents may include pedestrian, but more often than not, typically are a bit more on the vehicular side.
The crash data includes both.
Yes.
So one of the things I generally have heard from non-traffic organizers, that confusion when the light is flashing at the crossing. They're not sure if you're supposed to stop, you should be going, or where should be stopping. And this person said, I stop and I get pumped behind me all the time. I wasn't sure I should be going across or not. So we may want to think through and look into it a little more, just because few people said that. That doesn't mean it's an issue, but I can see that being an issue. Even being a traffic engineer, I can see that's an issue that we may want to dig into it and see if there's something different we need to do as far as the signal operation when it comes to railroad crossing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, listen, Eric Power, Deerfield Beach, I apologize. This is a large issue for the city of Deerfield Beach. I got a lot of things to say. And I'm not going to take anything out on you. And I want to say, you're saying a lot nicer than I was going to say about how I feel as FEC are when working with other partners. So you're much nicer about than I am. Do you have in the data the difference between the crashes on the Tri-Rail versus the Brightline Railway?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Quickly.
And then versus pedestrian versus vehicle as well?
Yeah. 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 It's not responding. I'll say this about the rail data. It's been a challenge to parse through in a sort of logical, intuitive way. And that's because of how the FRA reports are structured. Yeah, it's not very quick. Short answer, yes, we do have the separation between the two corridors. So we are kind of tracking that, and we are trying to make recommendations. We are seeing, might have noticed that, I know I went through them quickly, but there do seem to be more episodes and incidents taking place on that FEC corridor, right? We saw a dip when Brightline was suspended during COVID, right? When you track that out by year, there's a nice little like U shape there because you didn't have those high-speed trains running through the location. I might have forgotten one part of your question there, but short answer, yes, we are separating them out by the two quarters.
I think I'd like to have that data. I think we'd all like to see that. I believe still Deerfield Beach is the largest or the city with the most suicide by Brightline. So, I mean, I think we'd like to know because Brightline obviously doesn't want to share that information with us, and we have to collect it from BSO. All right, so we work with FEC, and when I say work with FEC, I mean we talk to them, and sometimes the wall answers. It's very difficult, and and I don't want to, again, I'm not saying this against you or your suggestions, but a lot of the suggestions you showed us today require the FEC to implement them, and they won't. They're not going to. We've had multiple conversations about fences. They will only do it through the Chrissy grant, and they'll only provide us like a 4-foot chain link fence, which is not workable. You know, like, I mean, my city has installed a fence, so has Pompano Beach, and so has Oakland Park, and we're all looking at ways to protect the trespassing, right, to protect the pedestrians from crossing the street. But there is also a distance, I think it's either 40 or 60 feet between a crossing where you cannot have fence. So it really doesn't stop anyone, you know, in that situation. In places like California, you get a fence like right to the street crossing, you know. So I'm not entirely sure why Florida might be different, but like there are other states where you can put a fence basically right to the intersection. The FEC will not allow you to do that, and they will not allow you to put a fence parallel to the road. That's not the right way to say that, but like along the road itself, so you can't switch back
40 feet from where?
from the entrance of the crossing. I think it might be 40 or 60 feet.
And if you're in city right away?
Yeah.
Okay, and then can you put the fence on the right of way line?
Yeah, well, we have some problems with that. I mean, like they want $3,000 a day for a flagman to sit there while you install work that could potentially be on their property. I don't want to get into those things today, but like there are some issues. But like I'm just bringing up the fencing issue particularly because the type of fence that you showed in your image is not the type of fence that they can get through Chrissy, and it's not the kind of fence that I think would be permitted at all. So just showing that as an example, I just want to bring that up. But I think that's the kind of fence that we need in certain locations because what you do is you double back. That's all you do. I mentioned the no right turn lights. I think that really is probably the most impactful thing that I've seen along Dixie Highway. And I think every single intersection should have one up and down the entire corridor. I think when we talked about CCTV, I know you brought that up. You know, we've talked to Brightline about that too. Installing cameras so they know they can slow down intersections. They won't do it. They're not going to do it because it hurts their speeds. So like that's a large problem. Going back to the data between, you know, the tri-rail, number of suicides by tri-rail is 0. It's always been 0, right? Number of suicides by Brightline is high. Right?
And let me just correct, I think if you go forward on some of the maps too, there is a section in the tri-rail corridor that does have a lot of trespassing incidents. So I'm not sure if that
Okay.
number's correct.
But you know, it's certainly increased. It's certainly become a problem. In the city of Deerfield Beach, I don't believe we ever had an issue in which a pedestrian purposely was killed by a tri-rail, right? Painting, I want to bring up painting real quick. I do think painting is a really good idea of the cross sections, but I've had some comments about that. One was we tried bringing this up before, and we were told that it looks too much like a crosswalk, and it's confusing people that it looks like a crosswalk. The design that you showed, I think also kind of looks decorative in that nature. I mean, can't we just put like "do not park"? You know, like can't we just put like the big letters like we put on roads? You know, like turn left here. I mean, wouldn't that be more impactful, the actual letters versus just some design? But I'll say maybe if there's a universal color that people just recognize and not supposed to be parked on this color, you know, for a train, and that was something that was statewide, I think that might be impactful as well. Sorry, real quick, just look at my notes. We did a grant, we did a Chrissy grant for one of our roads, Eller and which is just north of Dixie. When Brightline, or FEC actually came to us and said, we want to do this, it's because of the number of crashes that they had at that intersection. And their response was, we're going to put up another arm, another mast arm. Well, when we looked at the data, it was only pedestrian fatality that was there. There was not one vehicle crash at the entrance. So how is the mast arm going to help, right? And then they wanted us to pay for the mast arm as part of their Chrissy grant. So the only thing we got out of it actually was they extended the curb, so you can't come around the curb, and they checked their box. But it was, you know, it was disingenuous because the 2 crashes that had occurred there were both pedestrian related. So we're not working with with an entity that's kind of that wants to help us. You know, I mean, I have a lot of opinions about Brightline. I don't want to go crazy about it, but like they've never spent $1 of their money, right? They're spending everybody else's money to build something.
And again, yeah, they do.
Yeah. But, you know, they're not being a fair partner. And so I like a lot of things you're bringing up, but they have to be a partner at the table. I don't know what power we have as the MPO or as this group to get them to do some of these things.
And I'm glad if I can jump in real quick, because we got to go on. I wanted to also put on alert Natalie and Marcus if they want to say anything about Tri-Rail Corridor, but one of the things that I really want to achieve, and I hope we all can achieve this as a group, is let's not come up with solutions that aren't going to go anywhere. And so, Eric, I really appreciate your making the comments, because if there are things that we have tried and they haven't worked, we need to figure out something that will work. So we're listening. I didn't mean to correct it a few times, but yeah, just want to make sure that we're understanding, make a recommendation, and let's figure out how to make it work. That's why I wanted to highlight earlier, and I think Thomas, that thing about there are things we can do within the corridor and things outside of the corridor. So that is something that yeah, we'll have to continue to work on. I do also want to look at the trespassing. And I know you have some issues in Deerfield and I think in Pompano also. Maybe there are certain locations where there can be special accommodations for fencing too. So I do want to explore those more. So Eric, I hope this is our last conversation with you on this, because I do want to understand better, have the team understand better what are those hurdles and move forward there.
All right, so Natalie.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to jump in real quick regarding the comment about there being 0 suicides by Tri-Rail. That unfortunately is not the case. We do have, you know, our trespasser strikes, and I know that there was a map earlier in the presentation that showed, you know, that the results of that data. Marcus Thomas, our security and safety director, can speak more to details if you would like that information at another time. But I just wanted to say that, you know, we're doing as much as we can to reduce the number of trespasser strikes, but unfortunately, it is definitely still an issue. And we're working to try to minimize that as much as possible. And, you know, one of the things, just for a quick example, is there are a number of, there's a pretty large concentration or hotspots of homelessness along the corridor that right now trying to compassionately assist that situation, putting up phone numbers for those who are contemplating suicide to call the hotline, etc. So it's definitely an issue and we're trying to address it, but I didn't want to paint the picture too rosy.
Just quickly add to that, we saw some hot spots on the Tri-Rail corridor that were a bit of a head scratcher. They didn't seem to be logically near a crossing like that. So I wonder, Natalie, if that might be kind of what you're speaking to. Would be happy to talk to you and Marcus as well on that topic.
Absolutely.
But maintenance of vegetation is one of the biggest reasons for why the homeless population can exist on the railways. And obviously, and a lot of times that maintenance vegetation falls on the railway. So that's one of the other issues that we do have. So, and I know I was being a little demonstrative about Tri-Rail versus Broward.
We'll take it in and work with you. How's that? Mark, you had it.
Just a real quick thing. This is something that you can have an offline conversation with me, but the MPO was awarded an FRP grant. You guys are aware of this and what's going to be in theory. Okay, I just want to make sure because it's 21 crossings on the FEC corridor, Broward County, and
Focus on gauge, lights, and delineators and meters.
correct.
That's why Rob was one of the people that we're really focused. We understand that's coming on the crossing for vehicular. So how do we also protect the block?
Yeah.
So,
The one caveat though on this that I think is probably worth at least getting a better understanding of is that I believe during one of the field reviews in preparation for this grant, FRA came down and made recommendations for installing sidewalk and a significant dollar amount of sidewalk. So the example that you gave of whatever crossing it was with no sidewalks, that's illustrative of some of the crossings that the FRA rep said you need to figure out a way to get continuous walking paths through here. And I'm not sure where that stands. That was not in the scope of the original grant. And I don't know if or how that will be done at this point, but
Yeah,
Just to know that.
yeah, and Mark, glad you brought that up. We were discussing this yesterday. At FRA came, they gave us some money to do some improvements, and then they came and recommended a lot more. And then, okay, who's going to pay for it? And so that was the question. So I think you raised a good point, though. Let's see, get that information. I want everybody to know also we want to be efficient, even though we got a large grant. We want to be efficient with the money. So we did build on all the analysis that's been done previously. Paul Calvarisi, his first week, started working at the MPO, started working on Quiet Zone. He's still working on it. So he's been doing all this analysis. Went back to what, 1982 or something? Yes. Yeah. So we wanted to build on that, and whoever was asking about the information on the different kinds of crashes. No, but but there's a lot of information that we can share.
Think of something else that I don't think we mentioned was that during our original kickoff meeting with for this focus action fund, we did meet with FEC, with BCT, especially for their new Primo plan coming up, with Brightline and with the Tri-Rails. So we do have all the partners.
And FDOT represented CSX.
Yes, and there's some people from FDOT too.
Can I add just before we go? I wanted to second Mark's comment about the dynamic envelope. We in Fort Lauderdale definitely have some crossings that the crest, it goes up and down, especially Broward Boulevard, where you can't see where the end of the tracks are. So people think they have room, and it's 4 tracks there. So people think they have room to make it, and then all of a sudden they're in the middle of the tracks and they're stuck. And I think Sunrise is the same or similar. There's a couple that we have for that. And I know yellow wasn't allowed, but if there's some other thing that can be done for that. And the sidewalks are at the city's expense, not FEC's, of course. And we will have to pay for the privilege to have them there in perpetuity. So to echo Eric's concerns with the FEC. That's my last 2 cents.
Thank you so much. Pass it on to Fabian.
Good afternoon. I'm Fabian de la Espriella with Urbe Studio, part of the WSP team. Are we ready for recess? I hope we are, because we're going to talk schools, which is fun. This is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. And in order to keep students and school-aged children and their families safe. So we'll talk through, in terms of overview of my presentation, we'll talk through some of the questions that we're trying to answer. I want to walk you through the rationale and the process that we're going through. We'll talk a bit of methodology and process. Then we'll dive into the findings, and hopefully we can have a healthy discussion on this. And then we'll touch on the timeline, because this is quickly coming upon us. So questions that we're trying to answer, just to frame our process and our mindset. We really want to identify which schools or which school areas are at risk and experiencing unsafe and hazardous conditions. And there's a long list of questions there that we'll dive into deeper. After that, we want to really understand of the school areas with the most incidents and highest risks. Are there schools that fall within the equity tracks classified as high or very high? As you know, the equity analysis is part of the study that it's getting completed as part of this process. We also want to understand of the school areas with the most incidents and highest risks, which schools overlap with the Broward County School Zone Improvement Program priority listing and the hazardous walking conditions list. So the priority listing is surtax projects that have been classified or organized on the surtax website. We then want to understand what countermeasures, physical and operational, could be implemented to help improve safety for all users around schools. What policy updates could be adopted to improve safety for all users around schools. So that helps frame our thinking around these school safe zones for the county. So what resources are we using for this process? So we're using all schools in the county, private and public. We're using a school bus stop layer that we coordinated with the school board. We're using the High Injury Network, HIN. We're using Signal 4 Analytics Dataset, KSI, Killed and Severe Injured. Low Stress Multimodal Mobility Network Master Plan, that's the Bike Ped LTS. Equity Analysis Tool, the Broward County Zone Improvement Program Priority Listing, and the Broward County Schools Broward Hazardous Walking Conditions List. And so really what we're trying to do is select a subset of these 300 plus schools in the county for a more deep analysis in their local conditions so that we can identify and prioritize countermeasures and projects. The approach is to use a data-driven approach modeled after the crash analysis and trends methodology that was submitted by the team earlier in April, and rank and select schools within the highest need for increased safety. And the scoring methodology is based on two things: schools' environmental characteristics and the crash data within the vicinity of the schools, which we're calling the walksheds. We have selected that 10-minute walk, which is a half minute. And we'll dive deeper into that. So what are the environmental characteristics? It's the proximity to the HIN, proximity to high stress facilities, that's the level of stress, proximity to Broward County School Board's hazardous conditions list, walking conditions list, proximity to the equity tracks, presence of school crossing guards, and presence of school flashing beacons. So those are the environmental characteristics. And then we also used crash data. And so we wanted to pool the fatal and serious injury crashes for the time period within that walkshed. And we would look at non-motorist crashes involving at least one case of under 19 during the school flashing hours. So schools have different hours based on elementary, middle, and high school. And so we kind of work through those time periods to identify those periods. Then non-motorist crashes involving at least one person under 19 during the other school operating hours, so between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m., except those flashing hours. We considered all other non-motorist crashes in the area, crashes involving school buses and other motorists, if any, and then all the other motorist crashes. So based on the data analysis and prioritization that I just explained, we want to pull this list of prioritized schools that are at risk, and we want to complete an assessment, a site assessment within that half mile kind of walkshed to identify and document findings for these sites. And we want to document, do a Google API analysis within this area to identify some specific traffic conditions, drop off and pick up, bus loading, school bus stops, crossings, sidewalks. So really dive deeper into these schools and into this subset. And the hope is that we can do these site assessments for about 10 schools from our prioritization. And what comes next? Then we want to also develop a countermeasures toolbox, which provide guidance and based on best practices, and also identify responsibilities and resources necessary for implementation. And we want to also develop some policy recommendations based on local findings and national best practices. And we want to document a case study. We hear that the city of Deerfield Beach is implementing a school zone camera. We've already exchanged some emails, and we're hoping to feature that as part of the study. And then complete a prioritized list of school zone safety projects, which will have a scope and a preliminary cost estimate and so forth. So in terms of data, the fatalities within schools in the 5-year window between 2018 and 2022, it's of 511 fatalities. And we picked schools. This is a list of about 50 schools here. And in order to make it on the slide, we chose those schools that have 5+ fatalities within that vicinity, within the watershed. And so we can see that this is quite an extensive list. And we also wanted to look at the cities where these fatalities were happening. And so we clustered, at the top, we're showing they're highlighting the top 8 municipalities that are having 20+ fatalities within that vicinity. So we can see the list there for Lauderdale, Hollywood, Plantation, and so on. And so I wanted to show you and walk you through the environmental characteristics and the prioritization process that we did, so that you could understand the number of schools that are coming up as we flush these data through these layers. And so the more frequent or expected environmental characteristics here, the proximity to the HIN and proximity to high stress roads. So anything showing up on the orangey color are those that have fatalities within the watershed, and the blue shows that it's not. So we can see the contrast there of where the conditions are in proximity to these schools. To the hazardous conditions list, so we can see that there's less schools, so that helps really filter the amount of schools. And then on the right side, the equity tracks, so we can see also where schools are really falling within those zones, which is also a guidance for us in terms of selecting where to focus our efforts. Then this really shows that the school board and Broward County are doing a good job in terms of having flashers and crossing guards next to schools, because we have just a few, and on the flashers, a handful of schools that actually lack a flasher or lack a crossing guard. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, we could filter those that are missing these conditions. And so no school watershed has all 6 of the environmental characteristics. So that's good news. But we have 32 schools that have 4 or more. And these schools tend to be on the eastern side of the county. 2/3 of them are east of the turnpike. And some are really clustered near downtown Fort Lauderdale and Plantation. So we can see the darker spots on the screen on the map. And so we talked about having the environmental characteristics and then the crashes that are happening. And so we are focusing on crashes of KSI of under 19, right? So we are mapping here the crashes of under 19 within the flashing hours. And so we see there that there are quite a few, not many, and also during the school hours. So outside of the flashing hours. So this is good news. And then it's more frequent to see that there's definitely non-motorist crashes happening within the vicinity of schools. We see that, you know, many schools have crashes of under 19 happening within a 10-minute walk. And then there's just very few crashes that involve a school bus. And then, of course, the most expected and frequent, it's that, yes, most schools are experiencing motorist crashes, you know, within that watershed. And so we wanted to take a deep dive on these crashes involving children under 19, because really highlights the purpose and need of this work. And so we have 101 KSI crashes of age 19 and under, and 21.48%, I can't see. So 21 point something percent, it's fatalities, and that's a big chunk. And of that percentage, we have a 2 point something percent, a 2.9% that are pedestrian fatalities. So this starts putting in perspective the issue that we have around schools. Additionally, we know that 1/3 of all pedestrian KSI crashes in the county are tagged at schools or parks. That's a big headline. And so 14.8% of crashes around schools of children under 19 are bike and ped. So that's a big number. And so we wanted to see the trend over years. And so we have the number of crashes broken down from 2018 to 2022. And so we've seen a decrease in the number of KSI crashes of folks under 19, but it's still of concern. We're getting better in some way. Where are these fatalities happening? We wanted to highlight where are these crashes really happening. And so the fatalities are mostly happening in Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, and Pompano. But the most KSI crashes are Fort Lauderdale at the top, Hollywood, Margate, and Plantation. So it helps put also in perspective where the highest need is. In terms of when the crashes are happening, day or night. And so more than half of these are happening during the day. 44.5% are happening at night. And then the question of weekday versus weekend. And 2/3 of these crashes are happening during the week. And then that 1/3 is happening the weekends. So there's really some work that can be done to improve conditions. So how are these crashes happening? So almost half of crashes happened at intersections, but a quarter of these crashes were signalized intersections. So from an operations standpoint, there's also something to think about. And what type of roadways were, what type of roadways, is where these crashes are happening. So yes, most of them are happening in principal arterials, but the 21.8%, it's on local roads. And so 37.6%, which was a number that shocked me, was that, these 37.6% happened on 2-lane streets. So something to say also about local streets and what's happening around schools in the neighborhoods. And then in terms of speed, 19.8% happened at under 25 miles per hour. But of course, an expected over 60% happened between 30 and 50 miles per hour. So there's some speeding issue happening around schools. And then crash types, which is broken down by several crash types. And there's the bike and ped and other, left turns and rear end. But anyway, it just helps paint the picture of what's really going on. So jumping back to all the crashes. So no school shed has all 5 types of crashes, but 11 schools have aggregate crash weights of 6 or higher. And these schools are in clusters: Coconut Creek, downtown Fort Lauderdale, and Pembroke Pines. And so in order to prioritize the analysis, we developed a total score of 100 and combining the environmental and the crash data. And so we have a total score of 100. We apply 50% to the environmental, 50% to the crash data. And so we have a list of 30 schools. It's a initial long list of schools and that I wanted to bring forward so that we can have a discussion. As you can see on the surtax column, we've placed an asterisk there because those are included in the surtax list on the website. And so some of the questions here are, should we prioritize those that are already tagged by the surtax with surtax funds, or should we prioritize others? So we can come back to that list. So schools with the highest total scores tend to be located east of the Turnpike, 21 out of the 30. So that tells us something. Fort Lauderdale, Oakland Park, and Plantation have each at least 3 high-scoring schools. So that's 9 right there. And this long list of 30 schools appears to have enough choices to ensure representativeness and scalability of the in-progress action plan. So data is great, but it's not the whole story, and that's why we're here. And input that I would like to get out of this discussion is, whether there's past projects or experiences or history that could help us prioritize the list of schools that we push forward for the site assessments. How do we work with those projects or those schools that have already been tagged for surtax projects? Geographical equity, do we want to make sure that we push up some schools that are within certain equity tracks? Also school type and size, do we want to make sure that there's, that we look or we push up on the list some schools that may be whether elementary or middle, but on a neighborhood school or a bigger footprint, so type of school. And then the roadway context, do we want to make sure that we capture a school that is on a local street versus one that is on an arterial, perhaps? So things to think about. So is the data and the analysis completed reflecting what is really happening? Again, the data tells just portion of the story, but these communities better than any of us. And so based on your knowledge and insight, is there anything that you can input that you can provide us so that we can prioritize this list? Are we missing anything? And which 10 schools do you recommend we select for a site assessment? Do we go top 10 by score? Do we use talk about the criteria, the surtax and other things so that we can narrow this list. Yeah, we want to open up that for any comments. And I'll put I'll put that list back up. Yeah.
And if you're gonna speak, please just state your name before you ask your question or comment.
Cecilia Viloria, I want to ask if there's been difference. You said that the accidents happen at the intersections, signalized intersections. Did you make a difference whether there are LPIs at the intersections or not? Because I know the department is putting leading pedestrian intervals at the signalized intersections, but not all cities are doing it. So did you make a difference on that or not?
We did not. Off of the top of my head, I can't remember if the Signal 4 data set includes whether there's an LPI or not. It doesn't. Okay.
I think the process, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we'll identify the locations and then we're gonna do a field visit at the high locations and look at those things, like
Right.
the opportunities. But I'm glad to hear that you're saying that's happening around schools. The LPIs are happening around schools.
No, at all signalized intersections.
Right. But it's something that could come up during the site assessment. Once we have selected the 10 schools, we could definitely look at if LPIs are within the vicinity, within the watersheds. That's fine.
Well, one thing I would suggest maybe would be relevant here is to take a look at schools whose boundaries are almost sort of like, they have like bipolar now. I mean, that's not a way to, don't put that in the minutes, but so like Sunrise Middle School is a good example. So Sunrise Middle is on Sunrise Boulevard, west of the Turnpike, probably about three-quarters of a mile west of it. A pretty large component of the student body there and at Sunrise Middle are walking sometimes from, I believe, east of the Turnpike to get to these schools. So I drove through the zone a lot. You've got 15-mile-an-hour school zones. The compliance is great. So the kids that live to the west are going into a residential area, generally a plantation. The kids that go to the same schools going to the east, once they get past the 15-mile-an-hour school zone, are now walking on the 45-mile-an-hour Sunrise Boulevard, heading to the Turnpike busy intersection. Some, in fact, I think crossing the Turnpike. So there may be other schools that have this strange boundary context. There are two different contexts of where the kids are coming from and where they have to walk from. That's something you might want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony with Broward County. I have two questions. Number one is, first of all, you had some very good analysis of the data and lots of different categories broken down, and it's great. It's a little bit hard to for me to just sort of see all of it and kind of assemble all of them together. But so just one first question about that is, I think one of the charts says about approximately 45% of the KSIs occur in the evenings. So does that mean that those crashes occur? So I guess that means those crashes are occurring when school is not in session. So does that mean that this is a good analysis of the KSI, but is it relative to school zones? Because if the crash is not occurring during school hours, then is it a fair analysis to include it in the school zone analysis? So that's the first question.
So I'll say that the infographic was talking about KSI crashes of kids under 19, right? And so it was just trying to understand, yes, there's a lot of crashes that are happening at night, but and again, within this segment of only children under 19, most of them are happening during the day, which tells us that, it's whether it's in school session or, within flashing hours or outside of flashing hours, there's an issue.
Could also add. So obviously the sunset changes every in the summer and the winter. So there are some times when we're walking to school or, in the morning when it's still dark. So there is that a little bit. And then the other thing is that, children under 19 are most vulnerable, right? And so why are 45% of them dying in the evening? And I assume it's mostly in cars. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable. So just thinking about, to your point, if they're dying in vehicles, then what do we need to do to make those streets safer? And so looking at the areas where our children are dying and then assessing if it's walking, biking, motor. And we have that data to understand if there's a hotspot of under 19 that's motorized crashes, then we can say, okay, let's look at the geometry. Let's look at, let's say safe system. So it's really good data. It's a really good point. Like
Oh, no.
really understanding when these things are happening.
Don't mean to ignore that 45% of crashes occurring at night. What I'm just saying is that if they're occurring at night, that's unrelated, perhaps
Right.
unrelated to school activities, should we consider those crashes in a different context and not in the context of school zones? So that's my question. And
Rename it the under 19 safety action plan.
no, I don't mean that. I mean, because we're taking a look at KSIs in a number of different ways and a number of different methods of attacking it. And is this group of KSI, are we attacking this group of KSI correctly within the school zone context? That's the question. I'm not saying that we shouldn't attack them at all.
And if I can add on to that, the first time we saw the data, the first subcommittee meeting, Fabian and team had identified the crashes near schools. We said, well, we need to know, is it just coincidental it's near a school? Is it related to the school? So that's where he's added more analysis. I don't know that there's that correlation yet for this stat. This is just under
It's something that I think we should take a look at and kind of consider that. And I don't, just because a fatality is a fatality and we need to deal with it and we want to, but do we eliminate it, as a school zone issue, or do we eliminate it as a road geometry issue? So I want to place that, and so you can take a look at that. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we can't analyze all the data together. So the second question I have is taking a look at the list of schools that you had. It's many of them right off the top are private schools, Catholic schools, Christian Academy, and so forth. And my understanding is that for many of the private schools and also charter schools included in that line, is that they don't have as many students that walk to those schools, as many of them are driven there. So I'm just surprised that I see so many of them right up top. So that's the second question that I have, that, again, just something to consider and think about and see how that works into it. And also to take a look at from the standpoint of, I'm just surprised. I'm just surprised that these schools at the top.
Thank
Thank you.
I think something else that we should also take into account is the right of way around many of these schools. Are they public right of ways? Are they private right of ways? Because that also affects our funding sources, right? And the funds that can be assigned. Something else, just tagging along to what Tony was saying, is maybe we can do an analysis of how many crashes are happening during the school zone flashing timeframes, and then maybe we can do another analysis of how many are happening 1 hour before and 1 hour after, or something along those lines, so we can see which crashes are occurring leading up to that point. Whether it's students that are walking to school earlier than the flashers are on or whatnot. That's it.
Thanks.
I had a couple comments too. This is Karen. I had a little bit of trouble following all the data on where we got to, because the top 5 schools are all in Fort Lauderdale, and mostly all on DOT main corridors, except for Walker, which is interesting that it's really tough in the neighborhood. But then at the end, I have very few, and they're all, like Tony said, all private schools are in there now. So I don't know what the environmental factors were that got added that raised them to that list. And then in terms of surtax, I know when I've had questions about what those surtax projects are, the answer that I've gotten is just their school zone flashers. That's it. So there aren't any, because I've tried to get extra stuff in there and some RFBs like crosswalks and things like that. But I've been told, no, it's just school zone new signs and that's it. So I don't know if that's changed, but that would be something I would recommend looking at.
So if I'm understanding correctly, in order to have a more comprehensive approach towards these schools, we should still consider, I mean, if we have a surtax flag project or school, we should definitely
Well, I would make
still
sure
keep
what the
it.
scopes are with the
Right.
map. before you count them out. or
Right.
in.
Okay.
And then, I think, I hope we get to the good design thing. So an example, kind of the soapbox lead of air. The challenges we have, there's a project in design on Sunrise right now. We were advocating for the fourth leg of a crosswalk at probably our highest injury intersection of Sunrise and 15th, right near Sunland Middle, which is one of the top 5. And we were told no, because it'll delay cars. So, people are dying here all the time, but still cars are a priority, and we're not able to add a crosswalk at a signalized intersection because it'll impact cars. So that's the challenge we're up against on the roadway side. Not just
I got a couple comments.
I have a question that I see out of 30, 27 has the total score 98. How this ranking is done? I'm not getting it. Can you explain?
Yes. So we grouped the environmental characteristics and the crashes, right? So we gave them equal value on each side. And we gave them the 50%. So 50% of the scoring for the environmental characteristics for school, right? It got 50% of the grading of the scoring from the environmental characteristics and 50% from the crash data. And so we would treat them of equal value, but based on the amount of factors that played into that score, then they made it up or down the list.
Yeah, but I see all of them almost outside top 3. Actually, top of, I see rank 1, total score 100, then 99, 99. The rest are all 98. So how we are actually putting the rank when the score is the same?
They
All are getting 98.
They scored, so they're on the 2 and 3. 2 and 3 got 99 when you put the scores on both sides.
Yeah, rest are the 98. All of them 98. Yeah. So how we are actually making say number 4 versus number 30, same score. So what is the criteria that you are putting this rank on to after 3 actually, starting from number 4?
Right. So between number 4 and I guess there's a lot of that scored 98, and that's part of how do you help us filter, because there's some ambiguity there. And so do we play the tax? Do we play the fact that whether it's a private or public, whether we want to prioritize those that where we know more families are walking to those schools? So there's a bit of this discussion that will help us make that decision on how to push some schools up or down.
Basically, scored is the ranking is not actually just random. You did not rank according to the score.
Right.
Do you have any plan to talk to the school authority, especially when you see a high accident? The school may have better information about the students. Do you have any plan to talk to them?
They are part of the steering committee, of the school zones focus plan steering committee, and we will be sharing in a couple of weeks or so. We'll be sharing some of these findings so that we can have their input as part of the process for sure.
Christina?
So we're starting to run out of time, but there's someone that submitted a question online, but if we can just go through the existing questions that we have, or feel free to speak with us afterwards. And also, to crash is not an accident. I said a few times. I keep pressing this button, but I don't know if you guys can hear it.
Just quick comments. Mustafa Albasan, Safety and Rec. Looking at the scores and the criteria, I wonder if you could get that data from schools themselves to share with us if they have statistics of how many kids are walking in each school. And you would include that number in the ranking system as well, because you may have, as Tony said, some of the private schools, you don't really have many pedestrians walking to school. It's mostly a drop off. So those are, I think, criteria. You also, I think you should focus on some of the schools are countywide schools. For example, it's not listed here, but example, Nova Middle School, High School is countywide school because of magnetic program. So those schools tend to have less pedestrians, and I think you should not consider it part of the program. Another third thing I want to make a comment. It's surprising to me that actually a lot of elementary schools have. That tells me that the kids that walk into school are not educated to follow the signage, and I think part of the school board coordination they may need to consider at the beginning of the year or toward the end of the year, beginning of the year should be a 2-hour session to educate the kids how to walk to school safely. Thanks.
So,
Christina had her phone. I don't know if you wanted to.
yeah, so I'll address the first point in terms of understanding the percentage of kids that walk versus get bused or whatever. So we asked, that was one of the factors that we wanted to include. We asked for this data to our partners at the school board. They gave us the attendance district-wide of kids that are bused versus the ones that are not. So we have that proportion, but district-wide. We didn't get the school by school kind of attendance, and I don't think that they have that. So
They should, because they have a list of who goes on the bus. So if you have 1,000 students attending the school and you have 700 going to riding the bus, then 300 are walking. So it's
Doubtful.
right
Mighty.
or driven, right? Yeah.
or driven.
Christina?
Thank you. Yeah, they do take surveys at the schools in Miami-Dade County at least. I don't know about Broward County, but as to how kids get home, so they might have that information. But I know that your ranking, after rank 6 through 30 is actually alphabetical. So what I'm hearing from you is that you're asking for more input as to how you should choose sites for assessments.
Right.
And I will just follow up with what was just said in terms of choosing maybe a cross-section of types of schools, so that you identify strategies and interventions that could be used more widely in that type of school. So that maybe the type of roadway, for example, that it's next to, you'll have the private schools maybe be in more urbanized neighborhood settings versus the public schools on like major arterials, or and use that as an additional criteria, but make sure you get a cross-section of types.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. Thank you. And I agree that the county-wide schools such as Nova or private schools that really, we know for a fact that they don't have a lot of walkers because, they're drawing from a greater area. So that's a great input.
And also maybe look into, there are, magnet schools that use transit, so there might be schools that have heavy transit usage. Don't use that as a type. Thanks.
Yeah.
Mark Plass, MPO. I finally did that. So I think to echo on a comment that Tony made, and that is that, a lot of these private schools, by definition, almost don't have walkers. So to have them with an environmental characteristic of no flashing, no crossing guard isn't exactly, they're never going to get them. So those could probably be taken off your environmental things because those schools are not meant to have them. I also know that every single one of these is on the high injury network. So that's, I don't know whether you could take that off too, because it really isn't telling you anything specifically about these schools, other than they all have the same characteristic. But anyway, definitely you want to make sure that the schools are really never intending to draw from the community with walkers, that's reflected in this.
Leah?
Leah Uriel Miramar. I think we need to be careful when we're making the distinction between walkers and people who get picked up and dropped off. Only because, and this is particularly true for high schools mostly, if you have open lunch, which I'm not sure if that's still a thing, but more particularly, if you've got sports after school and you're a student, you're going to be walking, regardless of whether your parent picks you up or drops you off after the fact. You may be walking to grab food in between the end of school and a practice. You're still walking. You're technically considered, pick up, drop off, but you're still going to be exposing yourself to the risk of going, out on the street nearby and whatever crash incidents is there. So be careful with that.
And that's why we made a point to capture the KSI crashes within the flashing and outside the flashing times to make sure that we covered any activity around the schools, even after school, for after school activities and so forth.
From a big picture perspective, there's a lot of need, and it's a question of how do we prioritize our resources. I did some examination, had some conversations with the team about the Safe Routes to School program. Miami-Dade makes a concerted effort each year to identify schools and create plans and then apply for the funding. We don't do that here in Broward. We've let it be more in the hands of the schools and the cities because those are the ones who would apply for the funds. I had a conversation with somebody from another part of the state where they worked with a particular city that was interested in pursuing stuff. So that might be something to consider also, is if we have a willing local partner at a municipal level that will work with the schools and then can help pursue the funding, that may be something that we'll think about. So that's what I was thinking of, the groupings of the cities that had concentrations of the schools on this list.
So I have one comment, not really comment. I just want to know if you consider speed limit for the roadway around the school. Because walking, student walking on the 45 miles per hour roadway will have totally different to someone walking like 25 miles per hour roadway. The severity of crash can be very different.
So that's why, so of course, during flashing hours, there's a speed control, but also using that was the level of stress. So that criteria that factors into the LTS considers speed. And so we've used the proximity to high stress facility, which I can use as a proxy or use as a component of it. It's related to speed. So that's why we wanted to include that as one of the environmental characteristics.
Well, that's very good. So you must capture it.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is, so for the several school, we do want to, well, I cannot hear from James, and it's great information we want to have, because for some reason we cannot reach out a lot, and we had workshops, and we just don't get enough application.
Yeah.
We really want to encourage all the school or school district or local agency to apply for it, and we even kind of revise our criteria, and we want to found all the visits. We did everything we could, but we still did not get an application. So we were wondering, what's the reason? So it will be very helpful if we can hear from all of you.
Yeah, because we've had a few. I think Fort Lauderdale's done some, Hollywood, and I think what we tell people about Safe Routes to School is pretty much if you apply, you're likely to get funding because there's not a lot of competition.
It depends on the scope, I will say, and hopefully the new changes will make it easier. In our experience previously, actually Walker was one of the schools we looked at. At the time, D4 was only funding sidewalks. There was no traffic calming allowed, and the city had to pay for design. So that limited us on where we could do. So, Walker was in a CRA and we could use that funding. We were not successful in getting that application. So it was challenging before, but hopefully under the new rules, it will be easier. And then I just did have one question talking about flashing hours and crashes. On this slide, there's not one school on here that's marked that it has crashes and flashing hours on the top 30. Are there any schools that have flashing hour crashes?
Yes, we had. So
but not on this top.
I'll get.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll look at that.
I continue to have a little bit of challenge with the data coming together to really be school zone safety. Like Tony said, I have a hard time because if none of these schools have crashes during flashing hours and only one during school hours, that's not really a school safety issue.
Mm-hmm. Karen, did the city apply for Walker Elementary? Okay, and you didn't get it. That's interesting. Yeah. And then Eric, and then we want our other presenter.
I'll be super quick. Sorry. Yeah, I did get a grant, Safe Routes to School for Dixie Highway, 6 years ago. And last 2 times we applied, we didn't receive it because they are so sidewalk dependent. I know the criteria has changed. So I'm really happy about that because that's kind of been our conversation is like when you're a built out city, you have sidewalk in most places. And that's kind of what they were only funding. But from a state standpoint, you look elsewhere in the state, that's what they're trying to fund. And, we're kind of different. So I do appreciate the changes. I know everyone seems really interested in Deerfield Beach, so I apologize. I want to give a quick update. And I know I emailed you, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to talk to you, but not to air the dirty laundry, but we lost our procurement manager and our finance director at almost the exact same time, and we did fall, off our schedule when it came to this. And it was decided that instead of, because I think we were the first city to get a resolution to a commission for the cameras, we did piggyback. So we went through the process with, I don't know if Plantation is here. No, Plantation representative. I think Davy and Plantation beat us when it came to procurement. So, because we had problems. So that's what happened. That's just the reality. I mean, wish we'd done this like 2 months ago, but we just didn't have anyone who could help us in the procurement process. So we're going to piggyback with Plantation that is called, I think it's called Red One. Wait, Red. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just forgot what it's called. Red something. Red Speed. Thank you so much. And yeah, they were ranked #1 for them. So that's our issue. And I was just told this morning after I had sent you an email that it will be on the June 4th commission meeting. So I'll get you an update for that.
Great. Thank you for the discussion. This was very helpful. In terms of timeline, we have a subcommittee meeting on June 12th. Week of July 8th, we're submitting a draft plan. We're having a review meeting internally with the Broward MPO by the end of July. And by end of August, we'll be submitting the plan. So that's a timeline. Thank you.
Hello. No, I did not go back. I just wanted to bring the water. Well, welcome everyone to the presentation. Don't worry if you are stressed out that we already spent 90 minutes out of 20 minutes. We should be on time. Yeah, we purposefully set up this way so that the two most longest and discuss will one get out first. So I'm MD Sakwat Hussain. I go by Sakwat. I'm going to talk about Neighborhood Safety Action Plan. Okay. So we are going to do this Neighborhood Safety Action Plan in 5 different stages. At the beginning, since this is a data-driven plan, we'll look into the KSI crashes. You all know about the KSI definitions and everything. So we'll look into KSI crashes, but only for the local streets, because neighborhoods are in the local streets. Then we are going to identify issues and needs associated with the neighborhood safety, meaning we're going to look at each of the neighborhood safety crashes, KSI, and then trying to identify why these crashes are happening in the neighborhoods and what are the contributing factors that are leading to these crashes. And then from on, we are going to recommend a traffic calming countermeasures for municipalities of Broward MPO, meaning we're not just going to lay out, say, okay, these are the 20 or 30 standard traffic calming countermeasures. You are going to pick the one that you need. It's basically, we're going to look at the crashes by municipality and then look at the traffic calming measure, look at the pros and cons, look at the nature of the crashes happening in the municipality, and then trying to match countermeasures along with the crashes that are happening with the community. So it will be a match between the crash characteristics and the attributes of the traffic calming countermeasures. And then we are going to provide county-wide policy recommendations that can be considered as a standard applicable to all the municipalities. But that would be more like a discussions and getting input from all of you. It could be something like lowering speed limit. Instead of 25, it could be 20, or like we can consider putting more restrictions for cut-through traffic, discouraging them. So things like that. And like all other safety action plans, at the end, we are going to end up with a list of neighborhood safety projects. So the way we are doing this, we looked into the crashes. So we have 5 years, we found about 250K crashes. We looked into 2 particular criteria. One is posted speed limit, and another is functional classification. So eventually, the idea was like posted speed limit less than 25 mph, or so it would lead to a neighborhood locations. And same with functional classification as like local streets. So we found these both leads to the same conclusion. So we're sticking with the functional classifications, focusing mainly on the local streets. So what you can see in this table is that about 11% of the KSI crashes are happening at the local streets. And if you look at the center line miles, that comprised of about 83%. So what it's telling us that, like, although it's 83%, in terms of center line, the crashes has only 11%. So it's not like neighborhoods are really doing bad. It's doing great, but it's not close to zero, which is our target. Now looking into some preliminary crash analysis. So what we have found in last 5 years, 2018 to 2022, most of the years, we're having about 100 crashes, little low on 2020, and then on 2022, but not anything significant differences. But if you look at crash type percentage, I would say I see a lot of different stories than what I have used to see in the arterial freeway auxiliary lane crashes. I'm fortunate to do a lot of crash analysis on many different kind of roads, but first time I have seen something like that. Rear end crashes are not the highest percentage. Typically on the arterials, you will see rear end crashes are like 40%, 50%, 60% of the crashes are like rear end crashes. You would see here, it's only like 4%. So what I'm trying to point out is neighborhood crashes are different in terms of characteristics. So we needed to pay attention closely in order to recommend countermeasures. So like here you see the highest percentage is other, which typically we don't see in other roadways, which means if you look, it's like single vehicle, parked vehicle backed into crashes. That kind of things you will see a lot into the neighborhoods. And pedestrian is high number. So these all make sense to me. And what it tells me that we need to look into detail when we are trying to match and align with the recommended countermeasures. So this is a list based on the crash frequency by municipalities. It's not like the list that you just have seen in the like top schools list. It's like we looked into the 5 years of the crashes and just identified the municipalities which has the highest number of crashes in during 2018 to 2022. And I guess it's not surprising that Fort Lauderdale is on top of the list, but when we are going to look into the countermeasures, we're going to look how we can recommend appropriate countermeasures that can reduce this crash frequency. And if you look at some of the lower frequencies, crashes are like North Lauderdale, Pembroke Park, Southwest Ranches, Wilton Manors. I think these all make sense, but we have not done the like deep dive into why these are happening. We'll do that as the next stage. Again, when we look into the neighborhood crashes, we see some things are different than the typical arterial or freeway crashes. Like nighttime crashes, about 40%. That's a little high in my opinion. And also, if you look at the wet condition, only 9%. Typically, I have seen the balance like 20% around. So what it tells us is that like it's not like due to wet conditions these crashes are happening. So we needed to pay attention when we are doing the countermeasure recommendations. So I'm here just listing a list of crash contributing causes that we found from Signal 4 data. So out of the 539 KSI crashes, if you see like the top contributing factors are like lane departure, aggressive driving, speeding, distracted driving. So this is basically our common sense tells that these are the reasons neighborhood crashes happening. And you see like a lot of pedestrians are involved, and that's what we are expecting. So these all makes us feel more confident with our data that it's going to tell us the story that we need to recommend the right set of countermeasures. Now, a little bit about the background of traffic calming. So you all know the concept mainly arrived from the Europe when the idea was more like increased community involvement. They will feel that they're the owners of the streets. It will increase the aesthetic values, senses of nature, those kind of things. But But in terms of the issues, we realized it's not like neighborhood that's always are responsible for those crashes. We understand it's because of the increased congestion on the arterials, and it's not just like we are solving one street and then exporting the problem to other streets. So we are going to look into more like a holistic solutions so that we're not just shipping problems from one corridor to another corridor and putting the traffic more into the neighborhoods. So my understanding and the way we will move forward is like the idea would be to reduce traffic volume, to reduce more like cut-through traffic, and recommend countermeasures that will slow vehicle traffic. And eventually, we are talking about developing a standard design standards for those traffic calming measures, so that it can be implemented universally across the Broward MPO. And of course, with your inputs on what would be working in. So very quickly touching on traffic calming principles is like the right graphics. That's the most popular graphics I have always seen, and very insightful. If you see, the main purpose of traffic calming is to slow vehicle, because even if a crash happens, we wanted to make sure whoever is responsible, whatever is the reason, the casualty or fatality or like survival chances are increasing. So we wanted to make sure we are recommending the countermeasures that will help so that the impact speed would be less than 20 mph. And the left slides is from my PTOE course. I really like few things here. So that I put here, like we discussed, like many times we got into the discussions that we need to improve arterials surrounding neighborhoods so that cut-through traffic, we can discourage them. And also like we can apply area-wide basis traffic calming. So these will be into the consideration when we move into the next phase. Now this is the fun part. We're going to show you some examples of traffic calming measures. We categorized this based on like 4 broad categories: horizontal ones like lateral shift, chicane, traffic circle, roundabout, and the vertical ones like speed hump, speed cushion, speed table, raised crosswalk, raised intersection. So if you have any observations in your municipalities, in your roads, that this is working, this is not working, please let us know. That would be like more valuable, rather than we trying to look into the pros and cons and characteristics and trying to match into the crashes, because there are too many information out there, and we may not always find the right balance and right match between the problems and the solutions. So please let us know your feedback. And the other 2 broad categories are road narrowing and routing restriction. Road narrowing means like we're shrinking the width of the roads, like corner extension, choker, road diet, median island, on-street parking. And routing means diagonal diverter, and on a very rare occasion, full closure. By the way, this is by no means a comprehensive list. There are a few more out there. It's typically 30, 40 traffic calming countermeasures that everyone is implementing. Some has success stories with one particular countermeasures, but some has nightmares too. So in traffic calming world, it has been like very popular is that identify the right problem and prescribe the right solutions. Many times it creates even worse solution situations after implementing a traffic countermeasures. Here is a implementation cost by segment or intersection, which one is applicable for what. Relatively traffic calming countermeasures, those are inexpensive, except roundabout. Most of them are like in the low ballpark, but with a caveat that this cost is pre-COVID 2017 from FHWI. So the discussions and most of the questions I would like to hear and answer is related to these 2 things. What do you think are the contributing factors for traffic intrusions in neighborhoods in your community? Suggestions and questions about the analysis, the preliminary analysis that we do, and any further analysis that you want to see from us. And the successful countermeasures. We plan to match based on your municipalities, based on the attributes of the countermeasures, based on the attributes of the crash experienced, but any suggestions. I would like to stop here to take the questions.
I'll go first this time. The city of Fort Lauderdale has actually done some neighborhood analysis already. We've used Signal 4.
Yes.
We've looked at what's going on, looked at the high crash areas. And the majority of the time, it's maintenance of pavement marking, signage, landscape intrusion. Those are the things that are happening. And we've had success working with the county on some of those key intersections, like the one where the Lamborghini ended up on top of the house. What was going on there? And it was some site visibility things, some parking in the swale, some irregular stop sign laying out. So making sure people know cross traffic's not stopping, things like that we've been able to add to that intersection. And so far it's made a real difference. So I think the neighborhood one is good. In terms of intrusion, it's the navigation apps. And we've seen difference in volumes and people who don't know where they are going through local streets and getting confused and not understanding their stop signs and stuff.
Yeah, we have looked at your traffic calming toolbox. It is one of the reference that we have been using. Yeah, it's really an in-depth one. Yes. Any particular observations you have seen, like Fort Lauderdale is like experiencing the highest number of local streets, like any countermeasure that you have seen working great? Wow. Making it not so great.
Highway where we did
Mhm.
raise elements every 4 feet and
Mhm.
corridor, but it's cost prohibitive. So it's not realistic in all cases. But definitely raised intersections have
Mhm.
a fun antidote. We tried to do a raised intersection somewhere and there was an issue with our public works doing a project in between our survey and when we did it. So the elevations were wrong, so it wasn't actually raised, and the contractor messed up, so it wasn't actually raised, but the pavement markings are there, and it works. So like the optical illusion of seeming like it's a raised intersection, and all of the high emphasis crosswalks make it so that people really slow down and notice it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be raised vertically to make the difference, I think is that. And then we've done a lot of speed cushions. It's affordable and able to address some of the issues. The bigger things, or we do it intermittently. There's just not enough money out there to put raised intersections and tighten turning radii and chicanes on every street that needs it. So the cost is a big issue.
In our city, first of all, most of all is your city has maximum number of crash because of the size of the city.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Our city is small, but my observation and experience in our city, the neighborhood speed limit is 30.
Mhm.
Set by county. I think I talked to Carmela about it. That most of the city I see 25 miles per hour, but in our city it is 30 miles. Even I was asked by our mayor in the last meeting why 30 miles in our city.
Yeah, that would be one of the things we'll look into.
Other problem I see on top of 30-mile speed limit, when you see they are doing the speeding in the neighborhood, that is too dangerous. That is one of the things I observed. And also I see a lot of requests for speed harm.
Speed harm.
Though we don't like it, but that is one of the issues. And other thing, some of the residents they come with the technical solution. When I say non-technical person comes with the technical solution, that creates more problem. We get that kind of problem too. But when I see especially the speeding in the neighborhood, in most of the cases they approach to us for speed harm. But the problem here, some of the residents they want it, but you will always see some of the residents they're against it. They say, "Oh, they're going to stop here and look through my window." I don't like that. That is one of the problems to implement that kind of measure. But the way I see, I think you have that approach, the neighborhood speed control. If we see too many crashes, maybe instead of 20, it may be 15, 20, 25, maybe incremental based on the condition and based on the report or assessment, that might be a good idea.
That's one target we have at the end for the policy recommendation. And actually, this safety action plus was called officially excessive speeding and reckless driving in neighborhood areas. So yes, we are particularly looking at those two things, excessive speeding and reckless driving, whether we can provide recommendations in countermeasures that could counter offense those two particular driver behavior.
Also, one more problem I experienced that neighbor, they come with the recommendation, oh, we want to throw a stop sign, but for some reason, based on county standard, they don't allow that. For one of our intersection, we had to take that intersection out from the agreement because we are under pressure that we have to have a stop sign, and county report did not support it. But finally, based on our commission recommendation, we had to take that intersection out from the agreement with county to implement for a stop sign.
Mhm.
That is also one of the issues. Now they don't talk like they were complaining. We don't see that complaint anymore. But I don't know why county report doesn't support it, but that worked.
So it's a success story.
And I'll echo on that because since the county's not here, I guess we could talk bad about them. No, Carmelo, not you guys. not you guys. It's Carmelo's guys. It is a problem because we get a lot of requests of stop signs, and because it doesn't meet the criteria, it's causing a lot of problems for us. And they just want to find every excuse in the book to take it out of the agreement. And so we are doing the same thing, adding stop signs, and obviously the speed humps and all that stuff. But one thing we try to focus on is to see if the road is actually a cut through, versus the local neighbors driving through that road. One thing that we are in the process of implementing right now, as directed by city manager office, is to do the flashing radar speed signs. And from statistically, it seems like those are helping a lot compared to the humps on a cut through road. So I'm in the process of developing a policy where those can be installed in our city. I reached out to some of you guys here in this group, and not that many cities have policies established for that. So I think that's something countywide we need to look at to where those can be installed or should be installed. I love Fort Lauderdale's approach on that one is when a speed hump cannot be installed, which is a collector road or not a local road, then you should put the flashing speed limit sign.
If I could throw out a thought, I don't know if we talked about this, but so maybe it's a question of, as we're looking at the toolkit, what is it that Broward County will support? And what is it that Broward County won't support? Depending on which condition. I mean, because there's
crosswalk is a big problem for us because it seems like, we know people are crossing there, so we should do a crosswalk. And it's like, if I put a crosswalk here, then all of a sudden this takes out an agreement.
Yeah. But the idea being, there are probably some good ideas that, and different cities have opted out of parts of their agreement with the county to be able to make that happen. But we started this conversation earlier, so we'll.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add some to that, I don't want to go point by point and, have that discussion. And I'm not qualified to do it anyway because our traffic engineering people are. But I do say that, the county is not in a place where we want to take traffic control devices out of an agreement. I think they believe that they're following the NUTCD or, that type of thing. So in order to comply with the requirement as professional engineers, that's what they do. But I think what may be helpful is that through this analysis, sort of like what James has just said, is that if we can identify ways to help us do that, to find avenues where this thing doesn't become an issue, then the discussion becomes kind of moot, because we're not trying to take them out of the agreement. But they need to do what they believe is the right thing to do. So if we can find ways to help them to do that, I think that makes it easier for everyone. So I just want to say that.
Think of one thing that I just want to add to this discussion is that we do have the county on board, from the beginning. This whole neighborhood intrusion idea did come from the county to add into the scope. So the county also realizes that some of their existing policies and guidelines are a little bit antiquated and they do need to be updated. And we are working with Tony and traffic engineering folks and highway bridge construction or whatever bridge department to try to find out ways that that we can update our policies to be more relative to what's actually happening out there, as well as to try to find a way that we can try to get ahead of the crash from occurring rather than being,
Yeah.
reactive.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm just gonna pass that one. I just have something, another remark, yeah. I don't want to get in the middle of that. So, one of them I don't see as a countermeasure is enforcement. And, I think, maybe I missed it, but I think having enforcement in those areas where they're cutting through, where they're going through and having police. So maybe upping the enforcement there alongside with the speed radar signs and everything else, that may be helpful.
Yeah. I noted that. Yeah, on purposely, I did not show enforcement as a countermeasures. Typically, it goes hands with the countermeasures. And one of the major idea of neighborhood safety is to recommend something that does not require enforcement that like typically accepted by the neighborhoods, so that they don't feel like they're obliged to do few things. But enforcement, yes, typically a very big component to make the traffic calming successful always. Yeah, noted.
Good job. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the feedback. And if you still have more feedback, suggestions to us for the next stage of the analysis, please feel free to let all of us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump into quick build opportunities. I have like 5 minutes. Okay. So I'm really looking at opportunities to do quick builds. Part of our scope is to really explore opportunities. So as we've talked about, there's kind of 4 types of projects. We talked about this in the project delivery process discussion of we've got maintenance projects, we've got technical urbanism where you do paint and sticks and kind of try things out, right? We've got quick build where you can maybe build some mini medians or a raised crosswalk. They're pretty quick, right? They're not huge projects. And then you've got permanent projects where you're doing a lot of reconstruction, usually the most expensive, right? So are there opportunities to do quick builds? And we have scope to do some quick builds, designs, excuse me, not construction. And so I came up with a really quick process. I looked at the city high injury network list, and then I looked at the ADT that we have of those and the number of lanes, and I cross-referenced that with our quality level of service manual that we have from the state, which just got updated last year. And so I took the list. I like to just show a list. Anyway, that's our high injury list of cities. And then I looked at the multimodal level of service handbook. I'm sure each of you are aware of this. It's awesome. Yay, FDOT, thank you. It just got updated. And I just pulled this, the criteria on the right that shows basically that they've upped if you're in a, let's look at C4 urban. So most of our county is C4 urban. If a 4-lane can hold up to 40,800 vehicles before it fails. A 2-lane can hold up to 24,000 vehicles before it fails. And so really it used to be like 20,000, now it's 24,000. So the state is really getting on board with like, let's make sure that we're really balancing the needs for the modes by allowing more vehicles within the lane. So this is really great news for all of us to create safer streets. So I had 73 corridors on the city high injury network list. I removed all the 2-lane corridors because I can't go less than 2, unfortunately. And then I removed the corridors that couldn't be, that didn't meet the LOS, right? They were over the LOS if I removed lanes. That gave me 33 corridors. And then Monday night, I stayed up really late and I looked on Google, and then I looked at the Florida traffic from 2023. And I cross-referenced all of them to kind of understand. There were some FDOT corridors for some reason that were on our list. There were some that just didn't, the number of lanes in my chart didn't match. Anyway, so it got me down. I had to remove another 8. So then it gave me 25 corridors that are on city streets that are currently under capacity. And this is a very draft list. So I don't want anybody to freak out or anything. But I have 25 city streets that are on the high injury network that have an opportunity to remove lanes. So let's just look. I hate to, anyway, number 1 is kind of extreme because it's 6 lanes, but the number 1 is Southwest 3rd Street in Pompano Beach, Avondale to Dixie. It's the highest priority corridor. It has an 8 out of 10 is the score. That's the prioritization score that we talked about last month. It has 6 lanes at C4. It currently has 16,000 cars on it, which could hold up to 40,800 cars before it fails. So if we did a road diet, it could still hold 24,000 cars. So that we could go from 6 to 2. That's a pretty extreme one. The rest of them are all just 1 lane removed. So the next one is in Lauderhill, 56th Avenue. It got ranked really high as well, 7.25. It's got 17,000 cars. It's a C3R, so its capacity for 2 lanes is 22.4. So 17 obviously can fit within 22, so you could go down to 2 lanes. Sistrunk Boulevard is the next one. This is west of, mostly west of I-95. Yeah, from 27th basically to the east. So there's opportunities, and I highlighted the highlights are just like all different unique cities. So kind of to the discussion earlier where we said maybe we want to do like mix it up and do a bunch of cities. Or do we want to rank by like the prioritization ranking with like number 8, the 8 score is the top, and 1.75 is the bottom. But I just wanted to show you that I'm kind of doing this analysis, and there's opportunities I'm seeing all over. I think these would be great opportunities to discuss further. They're all on the high injury network. They're prioritized, obviously, with our prioritization that we've done that really loops in high risk and equity. So we're looking at kind of all 3 factors. We've got a really wide, I was really surprised that we had so many cities represented. I thought it was going to be mostly the bigger cities, but it looks like we have kind of all the cities represented. So I think there's a really nice opportunity. So I have like 1 minute for comments. Karen Warfel.
Christine.
Oh,
Peterson.
sorry, Scott Peterson.
Jump ahead of Karen. Sorry, I'm just, you kind of jumped right to lane diet, and we not considering all the other strategies.
We are thinking about other strategies. I think the other opportunities are a little bit easier, I think, and we're doing a holistic, I think I told you back in January that we're doing a 1,000 Little Things program. It's going to talk about how can we do like curb return tightening and all that good stuff. So we're working on kind of a holistic list, which is going to take a little bit longer. But I know there's maybe some political considerations. So I wanted to bring this today and be like, hey, is anybody open? Does anybody have any don't move forward in my city because political will or whatever? So I'd like to hear that today so that I can do a short list, because as you know, we're like moving really fast, and if we can get started on designing some of these for our project. We've scoped to do about 10 quick build corridors designed, not constructed, but designed to hand to you guys. So do any of these pop out? Is any of these a no-go? Are you already doing a project? Anyway. Okay.
Can I go after Karen?
Yeah, Karen.
That was a similar comment that I had. Why does it have to be a lane elimination for quick build? Are there other opportunities in the school zones, in the different things we talked about today, that we could do some quick builds, like tightening turning radii and doing a couple maybe pilots in the neighborhood that have high injury things that are a variety? I would say we're not open to lane eliminations at this point in time. All 5 commissioners are up for election. So that's not something we want to get into, and our city manager just left, and not a good time for lane eliminations.
Think of something that I just want to add, James, is
Jump ahead.
Go
ahead.
How about we table, these questions for the beginning of the next.
Okay.
And we can provide this presentation as we've done for all the other ones. If there's any additional questions, also feel free to email James and Christine and Tony about those. But think there's a lot of questions that a lot of people want to ask and comment on. So maybe we can table it till the next.
So if I could add, and I know you wanted to say something at the end, Paul, you have a slide, but Christopher Restrepo is here, who's one of our project managers for the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Part of their process was to do a call for projects to our local governments. And so we also want to compare the list of things that our local governments have said they're interested in. And so we'll have to have that conversation of, if it's not on the high injury network, is there, how do we use that to maybe it's related to some other factors too. So, but a willing partner, I think, is the biggest part of this too.
Yeah, James, can you put on there, the jurisdictional road owner and not just the municipality? So we need the owner of the road on,
And
All city owned, so that.
well, I don't, Copens Road, east of.
yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, Copens Road.
I'll take that one. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
They're supposed to be city roads.
Yeah, right. So just make sure. Yeah, that's all. I'm just asking you to just check it out. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, something, right?
Yeah, so we did a reach out at the end of April, or maybe it was the beginning of April, to all the TAC members and the Broward MPO board members to try to find out which municipalities have complete streets guidelines or policies that they've adopted, who has Vision Zero type policies that they've adopted, and safe system approach policies that they've adopted. And I don't mean to call out anyone, but we only received 6 responses thus far. From Town Davie, from City of Fort Lauderdale, Lauderdale by the Sea, Lauderhill, Lighthouse Point, and Margate. Some of those cities sent us an email that just said that they don't have anything. So if you can please take this back to your respective TAC members from your local municipalities to try to provide us a response of some sort via email, so then we can help tailor recommendations as part of our action plan grant for your respective municipality.
Was this an email or was that your attack?
It was an email to the TAC and MPO board members.
Yeah, so it would have gone to Chris and your son and to the board member.
Faisal, can you forward the email to this,
Yes, I will.
look at,
Well, we figured that out with Rick also in Hollywood that he didn't see it, and he immediately gave us an answer, but we said we needed it in writing. So we.
Sure, yeah. I can send this out first thing tomorrow morning to the respective municipality members that we have on this committee. But we started with the board members and the TAC members.
And then the last thing is we just want to talk about next meeting. We're actually going to shift the June meeting from the 18th to the 25th. James has sent an email out requesting this change. So just want to make you aware. It sounds like everybody is okay with it. Okay, Scott, thank you. So I just want to make sure we'll see you, not in 4 weeks, we'll see you in 5 weeks.
If I could just mention, if for Desiree and Sasha and Rochelle, there are health representatives, and I was thinking part of that conversation about education. I can't remember who made that, Mustafa. But the comment about educating school children, we do have representatives from the health industry, the health departments that they do outreach and education. That might be something that we can talk to them more about. So they were on virtually today. All right, I think, is that it? We're done?
That's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Try to get you out right at time, on time, 3 minutes late, sorry.